The quietest people are often the ones who notice danger long before anyone else. Morning sunlight stretched across the stone courtyard of Moretti Estate as luxury vehicles rolled through the wrought iron gates one after another, their polished surfaces reflecting the towering mansion that overlooked the valley below. Security officers moved with practiced precision, gardeners trimmed perfectly sculpted hedges, and housekeepers hurried through wide marble hallways preparing for another demanding day. Everything appeared orderly. Everything appeared safe. Yet Ethan Moretti trusted appearances less than most people trusted facts. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, the white Mafia Boss carried himself with calm authority, intricate tattoos winding across his neck and disappearing beneath the crisp collar of his shirt before continuing along his hands. He spoke rarely, but when he did, every conversation inside the estate quietly paused. Samuel Carter, his longtime butler and estate manager, approached with a thin folder resting beneath one arm. "The employment agency has sent another candidate for the housekeeping position, sir," he said. Ethan glanced briefly toward the front entrance. "Another one?" Samuel nodded. "Most applicants leave after hearing about the security requirements." Ethan answered with a faint smile. "Perhaps one will finally stay." A few moments later, the massive oak doors opened, revealing a young woman standing quietly at the threshold. She wore a clean but modest gray dress beneath a light beige coat that had clearly been repaired with care. Beside her stood a little boy holding a worn backpack almost as large as himself. The woman lowered her eyes politely before offering Samuel a neatly folded envelope containing her application. She never spoke. Samuel studied the paperwork before looking back at Ethan. "Her name is Claire Bennett. She notes that she is unable to speak." Several members of the household staff exchanged uncertain glances. One whispered softly, "How can she work here if she cannot even answer questions?" Claire heard the remark, but showed no sign of embarrassment. Instead, she calmly removed a small notebook from her pocket and wrote a short sentence before handing it to Samuel. "I listened carefully. I learned quickly. I work hard." Samuel passed the notebook to Ethan without saying a word. Ethan read the message once before looking directly into Claire's eyes. There was no fear there, no plea for sympathy, only quiet dignity. He noticed something else as well. While everyone else focused on introductions, Claire's attention had briefly drifted toward the security cameras mounted above the entrance, then toward a delivery truck parked unusually close to the east service gate, and finally toward a maintenance ladder that had been left unattended beside an upstairs balcony. Her eyes observed details most visitors never noticed. Ethan handed the notebook back. "Why do you want this job?" Claire smiled gently, wrote another sentence, and placed the notebook into his hands. "Because every child deserves." The first afternoon passed with remarkable quiet, yet Claire noticed more in a few hours than many employees had observed in years. While other housekeepers focused on polished floors and spotless windows, she instinctively paused whenever something felt slightly out of place. A vase near the library entrance had been moved exactly 3 inches from the faded circle left by years of sunlight. One security camera covering the west courtyard pointed a few degrees lower than the others. A service gate that Samuel insisted had been locked every morning showed the faint scrape marks of having been opened recently. Claire never interrupted anyone. She simply wrote short notes inside her small notebook before continuing her work with calm precision. Ethan watched from the second-floor balcony without making his presence known. He had hired countless employees over the years, yet none had ever studied the estate with such patient attention. Late that afternoon, Samuel escorted Claire through the mansion, introducing each department. The kitchen buzzed with activity as chefs prepared dinner. The greenhouse overflowed with fresh herbs and blooming orchids. The library stretched across 2 stories, lined with thousands of leather-bound books collected by generations of the Moretti family. Claire's young son, Noah, quietly sat in a comfortable reading corner, coloring pictures Samuel had thoughtfully provided. Every few minutes, Claire looked toward him with the gentle smile only a mother could give before returning to her responsibilities. Several members of the security team remained unconvinced. One guard quietly remarked, She cannot even speak. How is she supposed to warn anyone if something goes wrong? Another nodded in agreement. Claire heard the conversation, but showed no sign of offense. Instead, she politely continued arranging fresh flowers near the grand staircase. Moments later, she suddenly stopped. Her eyes lifted toward a large grandfather clock standing beside the entrance hall. She slowly walked closer, listening carefully. The steady ticking seemed almost normal, except every 20th beat carried a faint metallic click that had not been there before. Claire opened her notebook, sketched a simple drawing of the clock, circled the unusual sound, and handed the page to Samuel. Curious, he called the estate maintenance supervisor. After a brief inspection, the technician discovered a loose internal gear that could have caused the antique mechanism to fail completely within days. Samuel looked at Claire with growing respect. "How did you notice that?" Claire simply smiled and gently tapped one finger against her ear before returning to work. As evening settled across the estate, Ethan invited Samuel into his study. Warm amber light from the fireplace reflected across polished wood shelves while rain clouds slowly gathered beyond the tall windows. Ethan looked up from several security reports. "What do you think of our new employee?" Samuel answered honestly. "She notices what everyone else overlooks." Ethan leaned back thoughtfully. "I noticed the same thing." At that very moment, Claire stood outside in the courtyard collecting empty flower pots before the approaching rain. As she glanced toward the outer fence, she noticed the same dark vehicle parked beyond the distant pine trees. This time another vehicle briefly slowed beside it before quietly driving away. No doors opened. No conversation could be seen. Yet something about the brief exchange unsettled her. She calmly memorized both license plate numbers, writing them carefully into her notebook without drawing attention to herself. Inside the mansion, dinner was served exactly on time. Employees gathered in the staff dining room, while Ethan ate quietly in the formal dining hall. Everything appeared peaceful. Everything appeared routine. Yet as Claire carried a tray through the east corridor, she noticed fresh muddy footprints leading toward a maintenance door that should never have been used after sunset. She stopped, looked carefully at the unfamiliar pattern, then slowly raised her eyes toward the dimly lit hallway ahead. For the second time that day, she realized she was seeing something no one else had noticed. The rain arrived just after sunset, tapping softly against the tall windows of Moretti Estate until every hallway seemed wrapped in quiet echoes. Most of the household had settled into its evening routine. Housekeepers finished their final inspections, chefs cleaned the last copper pans in the kitchen, and security officers rotated through scheduled patrols without noticing anything unusual. Claire continued moving silently through the east wing with a basket of freshly folded linens resting lightly against her arm. Noah had already fallen asleep in a small guest room Samuel had kindly prepared for him, leaving Claire free to complete the remainder of her duties before the night ended. As she passed the maintenance corridor once again, she paused. The muddy footprints she had noticed earlier were gone, carefully wiped away from the polished stone floor. She slowly lowered the basket and studied the hallway. The air carried the faint scent of fresh cleaning solution, but one narrow section of the floor remained slightly damp, while everything around it had already dried. Someone had erased the evidence only minutes before. Claire calmly removed her notebook and sketched the hallway, marking the exact location before quietly continuing forward. She understood that drawing attention too early often caused important details to disappear. Upstairs, Ethan reviewed financial reports inside his private study while Samuel organized correspondence beside the fireplace. The estate felt peaceful, yet Ethan noticed Claire crossing the courtyard below instead of returning to the staff quarters. "She walks every corridor twice," he observed. Samuel smiled faintly. "Some people clean because it is their job. She watches because it is part of who she is." Ethan looked thoughtfully toward the rain-covered gardens. "She reminds me of someone who spent years expecting the unexpected." Samuel nodded without answering. Moments later, Claire entered the library carrying fresh flowers for the reading tables. Before arranging them, she stopped beside one of the large windows overlooking the western gardens. Raindrops distorted the distant lights near the outer fence. But through the shifting reflections, she noticed a brief flash of white from the security patrol route. It appeared only once, then disappeared. She quietly wrote a single sentence inside her notebook before finding Samuel. The note simply read, "Please ask the West Patrol to verify every exterior light." Samuel trusted her enough not to ask unnecessary questions. He contacted the patrol's supervisor immediately. 10 minutes later, a radio message returned. One floodlight had unexpectedly stopped working after its power cable had been disconnected inside a maintenance box. The supervisor believed weather had caused the problem. Claire gently shook her head before drawing a neat line across the page, connecting the damaged light, the muddy footprints, and the unfamiliar vehicle she had recorded earlier that afternoon. Samuel looked at the sketch with growing concern. "You believe these things are connected?" Claire answered with a slow nod. Before either of them could continue, Ethan entered the hallway. His calm expression remained unchanged, yet his eyes immediately noticed the notebook in Samuel's hands. Samuel quietly explained what had happened with the floodlight. Ethan listened without interruption before turning toward Claire. "You noticed every one of these details before anyone else." Claire lowered her eyes modestly. Ethan studied her for another moment. "Tomorrow morning, I would like you to walk the entire estate with me." Surprise briefly crossed Samuel's face. No new employee had ever received such an invitation. Claire accepted with a respectful nod. As the conversation ended, thunder rolled gently across the distant hills while the rain finally began to slow. High above the estate, one security camera quietly rotated toward the western gardens after maintenance restored its power. For only a fraction of a second, the monitor inside the security office captured 12 small umbrellas disappearing beyond the tree line together before fading into the darkness. The image vanished almost as quickly as it appeared, and no one in the control room noticed it except the silent woman whose attention had never once wandered from the things everyone else overlooked. The following morning arrived beneath a pale gray sky, and the estate seemed unusually still. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine through the gardens while sunlight struggled to break through lingering clouds left behind by the night's rain. Exactly as he had promised, Ethan waited in the central courtyard wearing a tailored charcoal suit, a pair of dark leather gloves tucked into one hand, while the intricate tattoos along his neck disappeared beneath the collar of his white shirt. Samuel joined them, carrying a folded map of the property. Claire arrived a moment later with her notebook resting quietly in the pocket of her simple gray uniform. Noah smiled politely before following one of the gardeners toward the greenhouse, where he had been invited to help water young plants for the morning. Ethan unfolded the estate map across a stone table. "Show me everything you noticed yesterday," he said calmly. Claire studied the map before marking several locations with careful pencil circles. The west floodlight, the maintenance corridor, the unusual vehicle beyond the pine trees, the service gate. Finally, she drew 12 tiny marks along the wooded ridge overlooking the estate. Ethan looked at her with quiet curiosity. Samuel leaned closer. 12. Claire nodded once before writing a single sentence beneath the sketch. Too many strangers appeared separately, but watched the same place. Ethan remained silent. He had spent years learning to trust patterns more than assumptions, and Claire's observations formed a pattern difficult to ignore. Instead of dismissing her concerns, he folded the map and turned towards Samuel. "Increase routine inspections without changing anyone's schedule. I do not want unnecessary attention." Samuel understood immediately. "Quiet adjustments only." Ethan nodded. "Exactly." The morning continued as though nothing unusual had happened. Gardeners trimmed hedges. Delivery trucks arrived with fresh produce. Housekeepers polished antique furniture while soft classical music drifted through the main hall. Claire quietly resumed her work, yet her attention never stopped moving. As she dusted framed photographs inside the East Gallery, she noticed one delivery driver studying the mansion far longer than someone unloading vegetables normally would. She did not confront him. She simply memorized the company logo on the truck before writing it into her notebook. An hour later, the same truck departed without incident. Samuel later confirmed that the supplier had unexpectedly sent a replacement driver no one at the estate recognized. Ethan listened carefully when Samuel shared the information over lunch. Coincidences usually arrive one at a time, Ethan said thoughtfully. We have seen too many in 2 days. Claire quietly placed another page from her notebook beside his plate. She had drawn a simple timeline connecting the unfamiliar driver, the damaged floodlight, the muddy footprints, and the parked vehicle outside the estate. At the bottom, she had written only 4 words. Someone is studying routines. Ethan read the sentence twice before looking toward Claire. You believe they are waiting for the right moment. Claire answered with a calm nod. There was no fear in her expression, only certainty born from careful observation. Samuel noticed the unusual seriousness settling across Ethan's face. It was the expression he wore whenever an important decision approached. Before another word could be spoken, one of the security officers entered the dining room, carrying a tablet. Sir, he said respectfully, our camera review found something unusual from last night. Ethan accepted the device. The footage showed only a few seconds from the restored West camera. Through shifting rain and distant trees, 12 separate figures carrying dark umbrellas briefly appeared at different points along the ridge before quietly disappearing in different directions. None approached the mansion. None broke any law. Yet every one of them paused for a brief moment to look toward the estate before walking away. Ethan slowly lowered the tablet and exchanged a long, thoughtful glance with Claire. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. For the first time since Claire had arrived, Ethan realized she had not merely been noticing small details. She had been quietly seeing the larger picture long before anyone else. That evening, a dense blanket of fog settled across the hills surrounding Moretti Estate, softening the lights along the winding driveway until the entire property seemed wrapped in silver mist. Inside the mansion, dinner ended peacefully as staff members completed their final responsibilities before retiring for the night. Chefs extinguished the last kitchen lights, gardeners secured the greenhouse doors, and security officers quietly confirmed their scheduled patrol routes. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary. Yet Claire could not ignore the quiet unease that had followed her since morning. While collecting folded towels from the laundry room, she paused beside a narrow service window overlooking the western courtyard. The estate lights reflected across the damp stone paths, but something immediately caught her attention. One exterior lamp had been switched off while every other light remained exactly as scheduled. It was not a power failure. It was a pattern. Claire quickly opened her notebook and drew the courtyard from memory, marking the darkened section before walking calmly towards Samuel instead of alarming anyone else. Samuel studied the sketch with growing concern. This light was inspected only this afternoon, he murmured. Claire nodded before writing another short sentence. If one routine changes, someone expects another routine to remain the same. Samuel immediately understood her meaning. Without raising suspicion, he quietly instructed the security supervisor to alter the normal patrol sequence for the evening. No additional guards were added. No announcements were made. Only the timing quietly changed. Ethan observed the adjustment from his study window without asking unnecessary questions. He trusted Samuel, and he had begun trusting Claire's instincts as well. An hour later, a light rain drifted across the estate, gently tapping against the tall windows while thunder rolled far beyond the mountains. Claire finished preparing the guest rooms before returning to check on Noah, who slept peacefully beneath a handmade quilt Samuel's late wife had sewn many years earlier. Claire smiled softly, brushed a loose strand of hair away from her son's forehead, and quietly closed the bedroom door. As she stepped back into the hallway, every light inside the mansion suddenly faded. Darkness lasted only 2 seconds before emergency lighting gently illuminated the corridors with a warm amber glow. Staff members remained calm because the backup system had functioned exactly as designed. Samuel appeared moments later, carrying a flashlight more from habit than necessity. The generator responded immediately, he said reassuringly. Ethan joined them from the main staircase. Report. A security officer answered through the estate radio. Primary power interruption only, sir. Backup systems are operating normally while technicians inspect the source. Ethan nodded calmly, but Claire was already looking elsewhere. Instead of watching the lights, she watched the people. Every employee reacted naturally except one temporary maintenance worker standing unusually still near the East Service entrance. He seemed less interested in the outage than in observing how quickly everyone responded. Claire quietly removed a pencil from her pocket and sketched his position inside her notebook before gently touching Samuel's sleeve. She showed him the drawing along with a simple message. He is watching procedures, not repairs. Samuel read the note twice before discreetly asking the maintenance supervisor to verify every contractor currently working inside the estate. Minutes later, the supervisor returned looking puzzled. Sir, every scheduled technician has already signed out for the evening. Samuel slowly looked toward the place Claire had indicated. The unfamiliar worker was no longer there. Ethan remained composed, but his eyes narrowed thoughtfully. He understood that nothing dangerous had occurred tonight, yet someone had quietly tested the estate without ever stepping beyond ordinary appearances. Claire looked toward the rain-covered windows where distant headlights disappeared beyond the trees. She closed her notebook with quiet certainty. Whatever was approaching had not begun tonight. Tonight had simply confirmed that someone was patiently waiting for the moment everyone else believed nothing unusual was happening. Morning arrived with clear skies, but the quiet confidence that usually settled over Moretti Estate had been replaced by thoughtful vigilance. Nothing dramatic had happened during the night, yet everyone who understood security knew that the most important dangers were often the ones that never announced themselves. Ethan stood beside the library window watching workers begin another ordinary day, while Samuel entered carrying a slim leather folder recently delivered from the estate archives. I found something you asked me to review years ago, Samuel said quietly. Ethan accepted the folder with mild curiosity. Inside were personnel records from charitable employment programs the Moretti Foundation had quietly supported. Most names meant little after so many years, but one photograph immediately caught his attention. It showed a much younger Claire standing beside a group of emergency response volunteers. Her expression remained calm even then, although she was wearing a communication badge identifying her as someone who could not speak. Ethan slowly looked towards Samuel. Why was this never brought to my attention? Samuel answered honestly, because it was not relevant when she applied. The foundation simply helps sponsor professional training for people rebuilding their lives. Ethan continued reading. Claire had completed advanced courses in emergency planning, crisis coordination, evacuation procedures, and protective logistics for hospitals, schools, and humanitarian organizations. None of the documents mentioned combat or violence. Instead, they described someone gifted at keeping people calm, recognizing patterns, and guiding others safely through unexpected situations. Ethan quietly closed the folder. She never mentioned any of this. Samuel smiled gently. Some people carry their greatest strengths with remarkable humility. At that moment, Claire entered the library carrying fresh flowers gathered from the estate gardens. She noticed the folder resting on Ethan's desk and immediately understood what he had discovered. Instead of appearing uncomfortable, she simply removed her notebook and wrote a short sentence. I wanted to earn trust through actions, not history. Ethan read the message before looking directly into her eyes. You believe people would judge your past before your character. Claire nodded softly. She turned another page and continued writing. After losing my voice, I wanted my son to grow up seeing kindness before reputation. Ethan remained silent for several moments. There was something deeply moving about the quiet honesty in her words. Noah suddenly ran into the library carrying a small wooden birdhouse he had built with one of the gardeners. His face brightened the moment he saw his mother. Claire knelt and warmly embraced him while he proudly explained every detail using excited gestures and cheerful smiles. Ethan watched the simple moment with quiet admiration. Power had surrounded him for most of his life, Yet this gentle embrace between mother and son felt stronger than any display of influence he had ever witnessed. Noah hurried outside to place the birdhouse beneath an old maple tree, leaving the library peaceful once again. Ethan carefully slid the folder back across the desk toward Claire. "Your past belongs to you," he said calmly. "What matters to me is the person you choose to be today." Claire's eyes softened with gratitude. She slowly reached for the folder, but paused before taking it. Instead, she wrote one final sentence. "Then let me continue protecting this home in the only way I know how." Ethan smiled, the quiet expression reaching his eyes for the first time in days. He extended his hand across the desk. Claire looked at him briefly before accepting the handshake with calm confidence. Neither of them noticed Samuel quietly stepping toward the hallway with a satisfied smile. He had served the Moretti family long enough to recognize the exact moment trust quietly replaced uncertainty. Outside the library window, Noah fastened the finished birdhouse securely to the maple tree. Within minutes, a small bluebird landed on its roof before disappearing inside. Claire watched the tiny bird through the glass and smiled gently. Some places did not become safe because they had strong walls. They became safe because someone chose to protect what mattered before anyone else realized it needed protecting. The following afternoon unfolded beneath clear blue skies, and for the first time since Claire had arrived, Moretti Estate felt as though it had found new rhythm. Employees carried out their responsibilities with greater confidence, yet no one relaxed their attention. Ethan had quietly instructed Samuel to continue the subtle changes Claire had recommended. Patrol routes varied from day to day. Deliveries were confirmed twice before entering the gates. Maintenance schedules no longer followed predictable patterns. Nothing appeared unusual to visitors, yet every quiet adjustment made the estate far less predictable than before. Claire continued her work exactly as she always had, dusting bookshelves, arranging fresh flowers, and preparing guest rooms with the same calm precision. To anyone watching, she remained nothing more than a shy housekeeper. Only Ethan and Samuel understood that nearly every improvement now protecting the estate had begun with one observation written inside her small notebook. Later that afternoon, Samuel invited Claire into the security office for the first time. Large monitors displayed every entrance, hallway, garden path, and service road surrounding the property. The security supervisor greeted her politely before replaying several recordings collected during the previous week. Together, they reviewed the unfamiliar delivery truck, the damaged floodlight, the temporary maintenance worker, and the distant figures walking along the wooded ridge. Claire studied each recording patiently before writing only a few words. Same timing, different disguises, shared purpose. The supervisor looked surprised. "I reviewed these videos 3 times and never noticed that." Samuel smiled quietly. "She does not watch people. She watches patterns." Ethan entered moments later, having received Samuel's invitation. Claire pointed gently toward the screen before tracing a simple circle around every location where unusual activity had appeared. Although each event seemed unrelated on its own, together they formed a slow path leading steadily closer to the mansion. Ethan folded his arms thoughtfully. They had been measuring our routines instead of challenging them. Claire nodded. She wrote another sentence beneath the map displayed on the monitor. "They are waiting for certainty. Do not give it to them." Ethan read the note twice before looking at the security supervisor. "From today forward, every daily schedule changes without announcement." "Yes, sir," the supervisor replied immediately. As evening approached, Noah finished his homework in the library, while Samuel helped him build another small birdhouse beside the fireplace. Their quiet laughter drifted gently through the halls, reminding everyone that life inside the mansion was becoming warmer with each passing day. Claire paused outside the library door, watching her son smile so freely. She had spent years searching for a place where he could simply be a child without fear or uncertainty. Ethan noticed the expression on her face and quietly walked beside her. Neither of them spoke. They simply watched Noah carefully paint the tiny wooden roof blue. After several peaceful moments, Ethan handed Claire a small leather notebook identical in size to the one she carried every day. Inside the cover, he had written a single sentence in careful handwriting. Every home needs someone who notices what others forget. Claire looked up, deeply moved. She gently placed one hand over her heart before giving him a grateful smile that said more than words ever could. At that exact moment, an alert quietly appeared on one of the security monitors inside the control room. Another unfamiliar vehicle had stopped along the same distant road beyond the pine trees. It remained there for less than 1 minute before driving away without approaching the estate. The camera captured only a brief image before the vehicle disappeared beyond the hills. Ethan looked toward the screen, then toward Claire. She did not appear frightened. Instead, she calmly opened her notebook and wrote one final sentence before closing it with quiet confidence. They have finished watching. Now they will begin moving. The next morning arrived without sirens, raised voices, or visible signs of danger, and that quietness unsettled Ethan more than any obvious threat ever could. The estate appeared peaceful beneath a clear autumn sky as gardeners trimmed hedges, chefs accepted fresh deliveries, and housekeepers opened tall windows to welcome crisp morning air into the mansion. Life continued exactly as it always had. Yet beneath the ordinary routine, every member of the security team now understood that predictability itself had become the greatest risk. Claire walked calmly through the eastern corridor, carrying fresh linens, while Noah attended lessons with a retired teacher Samuel had invited to the estate each morning. Every few minutes, Claire glanced toward the windows, not with fear, but with careful awareness. She had stopped waiting for something unusual to happen. Instead, she watched for anything that looked too ordinary. Shortly before noon, Ethan invited Samuel, the security supervisor, and Claire into the estate library, where a large map of the property covered the conference table. Security reports from the previous week lay neatly organized beside handwritten notes copied from Claire's notebook. Ethan quietly studied every page before speaking. No one has attempted to enter the estate. No alarms have been triggered. No laws have been broken. Yet every unusual event points toward preparation rather than coincidence. Samuel nodded. Someone has been learning how we respond. Claire stepped closer and gently placed another sheet of paper onto the map. During the previous night, she had compared every observation she had recorded since arriving. Different vehicles, different visitors, different times of day. Yet every movement shared one invisible pattern. Each event encouraged the estate to repeat familiar routines, so those routines could be measured. Beneath her simple diagram, she wrote one sentence. If they already know where you will stand tomorrow, change where tomorrow begins. Ethan smiled with quiet admiration. Then tomorrow will belong to us instead of them. Without creating fear among the staff, the entire day's schedule changed. Deliveries arrived through different entrances. Meetings moved to other rooms. Garden crews rotated between sections of the property. Even Ethan worked from the Bright South Library instead of his usual private study. Visitors noticed nothing unusual because every adjustment appeared natural. Claire continued cleaning windows and arranging flowers exactly as before, yet she quietly confirmed that unfamiliar vehicles no longer paused near the western ridge. They drove past slowly, hesitated briefly, then continued without stopping. By late afternoon, the security supervisor returned carrying updated camera reports. Since changing our routine this morning, he explained, every suspicious vehicle has altered its route. None remained in one place long enough to observe the estate. Ethan looked toward Claire. They lost the pattern they expected. Claire answered with a gentle nod. Samuel smiled warmly. Sometimes the safest victory is the one no one realizes has already happened. As evening settled across the gardens, Noah proudly presented Ethan with a small drawing he had finished after class. It showed the mansion beneath a bright blue sky, surrounded by birds flying freely above the trees. Beside the front door stood 3 smiling figures holding hands. Ethan looked at the drawing for several quiet moments before kneeling to Noah's height. Who are they? Noah pointed proudly. First his mother, then Ethan, then Samuel. Finally, he tapped the roof of the house and smiled. Claire watched from across the room, her eyes filling with quiet emotion. Ethan gently placed the drawing inside a silver frame resting on the library shelf. "It belongs here," he said softly. Claire looked at him with grateful eyes before placing one hand lightly against the frame in silent agreement. At that exact moment, a secure message arrived from regional authorities responding to information the estate had quietly shared over the previous days. Several individuals connected to the unusual surveillance had been identified, and their coordinated activity had ended before any harm occurred. Ethan read the brief report, closed the folder, and looked toward Claire. She had protected the estate not by force, but by recognizing the truth while it was still only a pattern. And in doing so, she had quietly saved every life inside those walls long before anyone else understood they had ever been in danger. Several months passed, and winter quietly gave way to the first gentle days of spring. Moretti Estate no longer carried the silent tension that had greeted Claire on her first morning. The marble hallways still reflected the morning sun. The gardens still bloomed beneath careful hands, and security remained thoughtful without becoming fearful. Yet the greatest change could not be measured by stronger procedures or improved routines. It could only be felt in the warmth that now lived inside the house. Employees greeted one another by name instead of title. Meals were shared instead of hurried. Laughter drifted through the library where Noah completed his schoolwork each afternoon, while Samuel patiently taught him the history of every old photograph hanging upon the walls. Ethan often found himself pausing outside the doorway simply to watch the quiet scene before returning to his responsibilities with a peaceful smile. One clear Saturday morning, the estate welcomed local families for the opening of a new community education program sponsored by the Moretti Foundation. Children explored reading corners beneath flowering trees, while volunteers served homemade pastries and fresh lemonade along the garden paths. Claire quietly coordinated every detail with remarkable calm, communicating through handwritten notes, warm smiles, and thoughtful gestures that needed no spoken explanation. Visitors naturally followed her guidance because kindness carried its own language. Ethan watched from the terrace, realizing that the shy woman everyone had once underestimated had become the steady heart of the entire estate. Samuel joined him carrying 2 cups of coffee. "She never asked to lead," he said softly. Ethan nodded. The strongest people rarely do. As the afternoon unfolded, representatives from the regional authorities arrived to thank the estate for its careful cooperation during the recent investigation. They confirmed that the coordinated surveillance had completely ended after evidence gathered through patient observation allowed officials to intervene before any tragedy could occur. The visitors expressed special appreciation for the anonymous notes and timelines that had quietly connected every unusual event. Ethan looked toward Claire, who immediately lowered her eyes with gentle humility. She had never sought recognition. She had only wanted everyone to return home safely at the end of each day. Later that evening, after the last guests had departed, the gardens settled beneath the golden light of sunset. Noah proudly showed Samuel another birdhouse he had finished painting while birds circled peacefully above the maple trees. Ethan found Claire standing beside the small wooden birdhouse they had placed together months earlier. A family of bluebirds had made it their home. Claire smiled as the tiny birds disappeared safely inside before writing one final sentence in her notebook. Sometimes protecting a home begins long before anyone knows it needs protecting. Ethan read the words slowly before closing the notebook with respectful care. "You protected much more than this estate," he said quietly. "You reminded all of us what a home is supposed to feel like." Claire looked into his eyes, her quiet smile carrying every emotion words could never fully express. Ethan gently reached for her hand. She accepted it without hesitation. For a long, peaceful moment, they stood together beneath the fading sunlight while the evening breeze carried the scent of blooming roses across the gardens. Noah laughed nearby as Samuel applauded another successful birdhouse, and Simple sound filled the estate with a happiness no amount of wealth could ever purchase. Claire stepped one pace closer and gently kissed Ethan on the cheek, a quiet gesture of gratitude, trust, and hope for the future they had discovered together. Ethan smiled with complete sincerity, knowing the greatest gift he had ever received was not protection from unseen danger, but the courage to trust the silent woman who had transformed his life through compassion, wisdom, and unwavering dignity. As twilight settled over Moretti Estate, every window glowed warmly against the darkening sky, and the mansion no longer stood as a symbol of power alone. It had become a place where kindness was stronger than fear, where quiet hearts changed extraordinary lives, and where the most meaningful promises were never spoken because they were faithfully lived every single day.